My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 39 years old, and for 13 years, I built a company that moved temperature-sensitive medical products across 3 states without missing deadlines, without broken compliance, and without ever asking anyone in my family to save me. I built it from one desk, one used laptop, and a phone with a cracked screen. By the time they stole it from me, the business was valued at $4.80, 8 million. They did it over dinner under chandelier light with smiling faces and folded napkins like they were announcing a birthday toast instead of a public execution. My mother slid a leather folder across the table. My sister opened it. I saw the transfer papers before anyone said a word. Then my mother lifted her glass and said, "You've carried this long enough. It's time your sister had stability." People around us clapped because they thought it was a family succession story. My father leaned back, looked right at me, and added, "You'll stay on. Of course, you work under her now. She deserves something secure. She has kids." My sister didn't stop them. She didn't even look embarrassed. She just put her hand over the folder, like it had always been hers. I laughed once because that was the only thing standing between me and a scene that would have ended with broken crystal and security at the door. Then I nodded, stood up, and pushed my chair in so carefully it made them all think I'd accepted it. I hadn't. I was done. Before I tell you what my father said next and what happened after I walked out, tell me what time is it for you right now and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The moment I stepped out of that hotel in downtown Chicago, the cold air felt cleaner than anything inside. I stood under the awning for maybe 5 seconds, still hearing the applause behind the doors, and realized something ugly, but freeing all at once. They had not just taken a company from me. They had taken the last excuse I kept using to stay loyal to people who had never been loyal to me. I walked 3 blocks in heels that were killing my feet and ended up in a 24-hour diner across from a pharmacy, the kind with burnt coffee, neon reflections on the glass, and waitresses who don't ask questions when a woman sits down looking like she's trying not to break in public. That was where I called Tessa Monroe, the one person who had seen the real backbone of my business over the years and never once treated my success like family property. She came in wearing a wool coat over scrubs because she had just finished a late shift at the hospital, slid into the booth, took one look at my face, and said, "Tell me exactly what they did." So I did. I told her about the folder, the applause, my father's voice, my mother's calm expression, and the way my sister held those papers like motherhood had somehow earned her 13 years of my labor. Tessa didn't interrupt until I was done. Then she asked the one question no one in my family had ever asked me. "What do you want now, Lauren? Not what they expect, not what you can survive. What do you actually want?" I started answering and nearly cried before I could finish because the truth was terrifying. I wanted out. I wanted my own name on something nobody could vote me out of. I wanted a company built with contracts, systems, and ownership structures so clean that no family dinner could ever touch it. Then the fear hit me hard. What if I failed publicly after walking away? What if they laughed and said I had always been nothing without them? Tessa reached across the table, took my phone, handed it back to me, unlocked, and said, "Then let failure come after you try, not before." Right there in the diner with cold fries on the plate and my pulse still jumping, I deleted the old company contact shortcut from my favorites, removed myself from the family operations group chat, and archived every message thread that had trained me to confuse usefulness with love. That tiny act should not have felt as powerful as it did, but it did. It felt like cutting a wire before a building exploded. By the time the waitress refilled our coffee, I wasn't talking about revenge anymore. I was talking about leverage, exit timing, client loyalty, and how quickly I could rebuild in a market I understood better than anyone in that family ever would. That was the night I stopped being their engine and became my own escape route. The next morning, I was up before sunrise, not because I had slept well, but because betrayal has a way of dragging you out of bed before your body is ready. I sat alone at my kitchen counter in an old gray sweatshirt, hair still tied back from the night before, staring at my laptop like it was either the beginning of my second life or the proof that I had just made the biggest mistake of my career. My phone kept lighting up on the table. My mother called twice. My father texted once. "Don't turn this into drama." Then my sister sent a short message that somehow irritated me more than all the others combined. "We should talk when you calm down." Calm down. That was what they called it when a woman was robbed politely in public and refused to smile through it. I flipped the phone face down and got to work. For 13 years, I had built the operational core of that business with my own mind. The contingency routing systems, the vendor decision trees, the emergency escalation scripts, the chain of custody procedures, the cold storage recovery priorities when a shipment got delayed at 2:17 a.m. in freezing rain, and everyone else panicked. Those documents had lived in servers, drives, files, emails, and meeting rooms. Yes, but the real system had lived in me. That was the part my family never understood. They thought they were taking ownership of a company. What they were really doing was testing whether the shell could survive after removing the spine. Still, I knew I had to be meticulous. I was not going to give them a single excuse to call me bitter, unstable, or dishonest. So I opened every personal folder, every cloud drive, every archived project, and started separating memory from asset, history from liability, instinct from documentation. I revoked convenience access I had set up on my personal devices over the years. I removed old branded templates from my software. I cleaned out saved signatures, billing drafts, scheduling backups, and vendor notes that I had created on my own time just to keep the company moving when no one else knew what they were doing. It was not sabotage. It was discipline. It was me refusing to leave my fingerprints everywhere so they could keep benefiting from labor they had already decided was disposable. Around 8:30, I made coffee so strong it tasted hostile and finally allowed myself to open a blank legal pad. At the top, I wrote one question. What can they take? And what can't they? The answer came fast. They could take the office, the title, the company name, the line of credit, the furniture, the website, the polished family story. They could take the illusion that they had won. But they could not take my knowledge of the market, my relationships, my reputation under pressure, or the private truth that many of the biggest clients trusted me far more than they trusted the brand. Once I saw that clearly, the fear in my chest shifted. It did not disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped sounding like I'm ruined and started sounding like build fast, build smart, build clean. By 9:30, I had researched 3 firm names, checked domain availability, and called an attorney I trusted from a compliance dispute years earlier. By 10, I had formed Whitaker Response Logistics, a company built specifically for what I knew best: emergency cold chain transport strategy, continuity planning, and high-risk medical logistics recovery. The name was plain on purpose. No cute branding, no vanity, no family shine, just clarity. I wanted the kind of name that sounded expensive in a crisis. Then came the harder part: outreach. I refused to send one of those desperate, excited to announce my next chapter messages people post when they are trying to disguise humiliation as reinvention. That was not me. I did not need applause. I needed traction. So, I made a short list of 27 contacts and narrowed it down to 5 people whose respect I trusted enough to risk hearing no from. I wrote each email individually. No mass blast, no emotional oversharing, just facts. I had launched an independent firm. I was available for specialized advisory and urgent operational support. And I would welcome a private conversation if the need ever arose. Then I sat there, hand hovering over the trackpad, and felt the weight of that moment settle over me. Have you ever hit send on something that felt less like an email and more like a dare against your own fear? That was what it felt like. I sent all 5, closed my eyes, and listened to the room go quiet. For a few seconds, the silence was unbearable. Then something inside me settled. Because, no matter what happened next, I had done the one thing my family never expected me to do. I had stopped begging to be recognized and started positioning myself to be impossible to replace. The first few weeks of building Whitaker Response Logistics were not glamorous, inspiring, or cinematic. They were exhausting in the most unphotogenic way possible. I spent mornings drafting process maps, afternoons taking intro calls, evenings revising pricing models, and nights lying awake wondering whether I had overestimated how much of my old success had truly been mine. I worked from my apartment, from my car, from borrowed tables and hotel lobbies, and once from a quiet hallway outside a medical conference room, because the signal was better there than in the cafe downstairs. My meals became whatever could be eaten one-handed while reviewing carrier incident reports. My wardrobe turned into a rotation of blazers, black slacks, and emergency flats that lived in the passenger seat. It was not freedom yet. It was reconstruction. But reconstruction has a rhythm if you stay with it long enough. The first sign that I had not destroyed my own future by walking out came on a Wednesday afternoon when a director from a regional oncology network called me directly. A refrigerated shipment had been delayed, backup routing was failing, and nobody on their current vendor side was giving them confidence. We had never worked together independently before, but she had known me from my old company and said the line that changed my entire week. "I was hoping you were available. You were always the one who actually fixed things." I handled the issue in under 4 hours, documented every recovery step, and sent a post-incident summary that same evening. The next morning, she referred me to another contact. Then, a compounding pharmacy owner called after hearing my name from someone at a supplier meeting. Then a lab administrator asked if I would consider consulting on continuity procedures for high-value weekend routes. It did not happen all at once, but it happened steadily enough for me to feel the ground start to hold. Momentum in business is strange. At first, it feels invisible, like pushing a dead vehicle uphill in the dark. Then one day, you look up and realize it is moving on its own weight. By the middle of the second month, I had 3 active consulting relationships, 1 retainer offer, and enough recurring interest to stop pretending this was temporary. I hired a fractional compliance analyst. I rented a small office suite above a dental practice in Oakbrook because it was quiet, practical, and exactly the kind of unflashy space I could afford without losing sleep. I bought 1 decent desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard, and a coffee machine that sounded like it was fighting for its life every morning. It was perfect. It was mine. And then, just as I began to feel the first honest version of stability, the industry whispers about my family's company began to sharpen into facts. At first, it was vague. Someone mentioned delayed renewals. Someone else hinted at staffing turnover. Then the real messages started landing in my inbox. One former client contact wrote, following up after recent leadership changes. Another said, "We were told operations are being restructured. Are you available independently?" I kept my responses careful, professional, and completely clean. I never badmouthed the old company. I didn't need to. Their own decisions were doing the talking. The most satisfying email came from a hospital procurement executive who had once been one of our most demanding accounts. His message was short and direct. "To be candid, our confidence was with you, not the transition. We would like to discuss future support directly." I read that line 3 times, not because I was surprised, but because there is a deep, almost physical satisfaction in watching reality finally say out loud what you were forced to swallow in silence. The company my family had handed to Megan was not failing because I cursed it, sabotaged it, or secretly pulled strings behind the scenes. It was failing because they believed the business was made of assets, not judgment, paperwork, not trust, appearances, not competence. Megan had made cost-cutting changes in all the wrong places. She downgraded carrier review standards because she wanted faster margins. She dismissed 2 senior dispatch supervisors as too resistant to change when what they were really resistant to was stupidity. She delayed maintenance on temperature monitoring equipment to save money. She stopped listening to the people who knew which small cracks become disasters in logistics. Most damaging of all, she talked to long-term clients as if they were attached to the family name, not the standards I had spent 13 years delivering. That arrogance cost them dearly. Within 8 weeks, they lost 2 of their largest accounts. One moved to a competitor immediately. The other did something even worse from my family's perspective. They requested a private transition conversation with me. Me, not the company, not the board, not leadership. Me. That was the moment I truly understood the difference between revenge in fantasy and revenge in real life. Fantasy revenge is loud. It throws drinks, slams doors, humiliates people in front of crowds. Real revenge is quieter. It is the market correcting the lie after you walk away. It is clients following competence instead of surname. It is the people who overlooked you suddenly discovering that what they called support was actually the entire structure. My mother still had not apologized. My father still moved through the world with the confidence of a man who thinks volume can substitute for wisdom. But the numbers were beginning to expose them. Revenue pressure mounted. Staff morale sank. Vendor confidence weakened. And while they were busy trying to preserve pride, I was building something leaner, sharper, and harder to steal. The sweetest part was not even their decline. It was my own clarity. Every contract I signed, every recommendation I received, every problem I solved without them reminded me that I had never been lucky to sit at their table. They had been lucky to have me building it. By the time month 3 rolled in, Whitaker Response Logistics no longer felt like an act of defiance. It felt like a real company with weight, standards, and a future. That shift mattered more than I expected. In the early weeks, every small win still felt connected to the night at the hotel, as if I were dragging that betrayal behind me and using it as fuel. But somewhere between my 4th signed contract and the day I finally stopped checking whether my parents had tried to contact me again, the emotional center changed. I wasn't just running away from what they had done. I was running toward a version of myself that no longer needed their permission to exist. That was also when Evan Parker entered the story. Evan had spent years in regulatory operations for a national diagnostics network, and his reputation in our industry was exactly what mine had become. Calm under pressure, allergic to nonsense, and impossible to impress with shiny presentations that collapsed under real-world stress. We met at a quiet restaurant near River North after he emailed me saying he had heard I was building something serious. I liked him instantly because he didn't waste time flattering me. He asked hard questions. What was my client mix? What was my capacity threshold? How was I handling escalation coverage? Did I want to stay boutique or build regional dominance? We talked for an hour and a half, and for the first time in months, I had a business conversation that felt purely strategic. Not defensive, not emotional, not tied to family damage control. At one point, he set his coffee down, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Let me save you some time. Your old company didn't lose value because you left a title behind. It lost value because the only person who understood the organism walked out of the building." That line stayed with me. Evan eventually came on as a strategic operations consultant, and with him, my company sharpened quickly. We tightened my service packages, cleaned up pricing, built a clear response ladder for emergency contracts, and started pitching larger networks that would have been out of reach for me alone. It was the kind of progress that makes you believe the wound might eventually become an advantage. Then Megan texted. The message hit my phone in the middle of a Thursday workday. "Can we meet? Please don't ignore this. It's important." I stared at it for a while, then locked the screen, and went back to my notes. 5 minutes later, another one came in. "I'm asking as your sister, not as the company." That line irritated me instantly. People only separate themselves from the system when the system stops protecting them. Still, curiosity is powerful, especially when someone who once looked so comfortable taking from you suddenly sounds unsure. I did not answer that day or the next. On Saturday morning, she sent one final message. "Please." I agreed to a public place by the lake because I had no intention of stepping into a private room with someone who had smiled while my life's work was reassigned over dessert. When I saw her walking toward me, I knew before she spoke that things were worse than the rumors. Megan was still dressed well, still carefully polished, but the polish was brittle. There are people who wear expensive clothes the same way other people wear bandages, tight enough to keep the breakdown from showing. That was her. She sat down, gave me a thin smile, and opened with, "You look good." I said, "You look like you haven't slept," because I was too tired to perform politeness. For a minute, she tried to control the tone, talking in vague executive language about market conditions, transition stress, staffing complexity. I let her talk because sometimes the fastest way to the truth is to let someone exhaust their excuses first. Eventually, she got there. "Mom thought this would be smoother," she admitted. "Dad kept saying you always exaggerated how difficult the business was." "I guess I believe that." I said nothing. Silence is useful when someone is finally hearing themselves clearly. She kept going, and the cracks widened. They had lost clients. Internal turnover was rising. Vendors were asking sharper questions. One line of credit was under review. A former manager had quit after an argument over compliance shortcuts. 2 long-term accounts had requested transition meetings because they were concerned about continuity. Then she reached the real reason for the meeting. "Come back," she said, trying to sound measured. "Not under me exactly, more like beside me. We can restructure the leadership story and present it as a strategic partnership." I nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was breathtaking. 5 months earlier, I was told I would work under her because she deserved stability. Now she was offering beside me like it was some gracious compromise. "No," I said. Her expression tightened immediately. "Lauren, be realistic," she snapped. And for 1 second, the old Megan was back. The entitled one, the one who mistook access for merit. "You've built a nice little operation, but this company still has scale, existing contracts, infrastructure, capital. We could still salvage this if you stopped being stubborn." There it was, desperation wrapped in insult. I leaned forward and kept my voice low. "I am not being stubborn. I am being expensive." That shut her up for a second. Then she tried a different route, softer this time, almost childlike. "Mom always said you were the strong one. She said you cared more about work than about making people feel comfortable. She said I needed this more than you did." I held her gaze and asked the question she had been avoiding the entire time, and that made it okay to take what I built. She opened her mouth, then closed it. No answer, just the first real shame I had seen on her face since all of this began. But even then, she wasn't fully honest. "I thought I could grow into it," she said quietly. "I thought once it was mine, I'd figure it out." That sentence told me everything. She had not wanted to build. She had wanted to arrive. She thought ownership would transform her into capability. It never does. When we stood to leave, she made one last attempt to hook me back into the family script. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're just going to stand there and watch us drown?" I looked at her for a long second before answering. "No, I'm going to keep doing what you all assumed anyone could do." Then I turned and walked away. And as I did, I kept thinking about the question at the center of stories like this, the one people argue over because there is no easy answer. What do you owe someone who stole from you when they finally realize your value only after losing access to it? Mercy, distance, a lesson, or nothing at all? That question stayed with me long after the cafe disappeared behind me because I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, it would not be on the terms of the people who had mistaken my loyalty for ownership. 3 days after the cafe meeting, my mother called from her private number because I had stopped answering the main one. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear how desperation sounds when it finally loses its jewelry and polite phrasing. "Lauren." She began using the voice she used when she wanted a room to believe she was the reasonable one. "This has gone far enough." I said nothing. She took that as permission and kept going. She said the company was under strain. She said Megan was overwhelmed. She said the family name was at risk, as if the name had ever loaded a truck at midnight or talked a panicked clinic director through a compliance emergency. Then she said the thing that made my decision for me. "You know your sister isn't built for this pressure the way you are." I actually closed my eyes because there it was again. Not remorse, not accountability, just another attempt to turn my confidence into an obligation. "So you knew that?" I said quietly. "You knew she couldn't run it and you gave it to her anyway." My mother hesitated, which told me everything. "She needed something secure," she said. "You always land on your feet. There are sentences you remember word for the rest of your life." That was one of them. Not because it was cruel in a dramatic way, but because it exposed the family math I had lived inside for years. Give the burden to the capable daughter. Give the reward to the easier one and call it love. She asked me to come into the office. I told her no. She insisted. I still said no. Then my father got on the line and tried the old command tone. The one that used to work when I was younger and still mistook intimidation for authority. "You don't get to punish this family because you're hurt," he said. "You're acting emotional." I laughed right into the phone. "No," I said. "What I'm doing is called consequences." Then I hung up. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Megan emailed me that night with a subject line that simply read, "I'll do whatever it takes." I ignored it. She sent another one the next morning, longer this time, and for the first time there was no performance in it. No language about family legacy. No attempts to negotiate titles. Just facts. Revenue down 38%. 2 more resignations pending. Credit line under review. Clients requesting leadership clarification. And one sentence near the bottom that was so brutally plain it stopped me cold. "I've spent my whole life being jealous that everyone respected you more than me. And I let that jealousy make me stupid." That did not erase what she had done, but it did make me pause. So, I agreed to meet once on my terms at their office with no parents in the room. When I walked into the building 5 months after leaving, the place felt smaller. Not physically smaller, but spiritually. The front desk staff who used to greet me with easy familiarity looked awkward now, like they weren't sure whether to apologize or salute. Megan was waiting in the conference room with no folder, no attorney, no fake confidence, just a yellow notepad and red-rimmed eyes. "Mom and Dad aren't here," she said. I told them this was my mess. That was the first competent thing I had heard from her. I sat down and told her before she could begin. "I am not coming back. I am not taking a title under this company. I am not carrying your decision for you." She nodded slowly, as if she had rehearsed hearing that. Then she asked, "Is there anything you will do?" Snorts. I thought about it carefully, because this was where revenge stories usually choose chaos over meaning. I didn't want chaos. I wanted truth with a price attached. Maybe I said one condition. She looked up. "You make a public video on the company's professional channels. No spin, no vague language. You state that the leadership transition was mishandled, that operational expertise was ignored, that staff concerns were dismissed, and that I built the business foundation you all treated like furniture. You apologize to the employees who warned you. You apologize to the clients who were misled, and you do it yourself." Her face went white publicly. "Yes. Mom will never allow that." "Then call her. Tell her I said no." Megan looked down at the table for a long time. I could practically hear the battle between pride and necessity. Finally, she whispered, "If I do it, would you help?" I kept my answer clean. "I will not save the company. I will review your recovery plan once. I will introduce you to one smaller client opportunity that fits your current capacity, and Snorts, I will tell you exactly what must change if you want any chance of surviving. That's all." She swallowed hard, then nodded. "Okay." In that moment, she looked less like my enemy and more like a person being stripped of the last lies she could hide behind. I didn't comfort her. I didn't need to. The condition was the lesson. Accountability before assistance. Truth before rescue. Megan posted the video 48 hours later. And when I say the internet in our industry noticed, I mean noticed immediately. She sat in a plain conference room with no branding wall behind her, no polished script, no mother beside her coaching the tone, and said what should have been said 5 months earlier. She admitted the transition had been mishandled. She acknowledged that the systems and client trust under the business had been built by me over 13 years. Snorts. She admitted that experienced staff had raised concerns that leadership ignored. She apologized to employees for the instability and to clients for the loss of confidence. It was not perfect. Her voice shook. She looked miserable. Good. Some truths are supposed to cost you. My mother was furious. My father called it humiliating. But humiliation was the cheap version of what they had almost caused. Collapse would have been more expensive. I watched the video once, sent Megan a 3-page recovery memo, and kept my promise exactly as stated. No more, no less. I introduced her to one small regional clinic group that needed short-term transport support, a manageable account, not a crown jewel. Then I stepped back. The old company survived, but only partially. They never recovered 40% of the lost revenue. Several major clients never returned. 2 former managers refused to come back. The bank tightened oversight. The family learned the difference between inheritance and stewardship the painful way. One is a signature, the other is a skill set. Meanwhile, Whitaker Response Logistics kept growing. Evan formalized his role. Tessa helped me recruit a stronger operations coordinator. By the beginning of month 6, We signed the largest agreement of my career, a seven-figure emergency response and continuity contract with a multi-state specialty care network that had originally known me from my old work but chose my new company because, in their words, leadership credibility matters more than legacy structure. I printed that sentence and kept it in my desk drawer for a week before finally framing it. Not because I needed to gloat, but because after years of being useful and unseen, it felt important to preserve one clear piece of language that told the truth. A month later, I stood outside my new office after the signage had been installed. Whitaker Response Logistics, clean letters, my lease, my structure, my risk, my reward. From the corner of that block, if you looked past two buildings and across the traffic, you could almost see the older office tower where the family company still limped along under a reduced footprint. I looked once, then looked away. That mattered. The old version of me would have stared, measuring wounds, replaying the dinner, checking whether justice looked big enough from a distance. But the woman standing there that morning understood something better. The deepest revenge is not obsession. It is detachment with receipts. Megan and I are not close now, but we are honest in a way we never were before. She learned to stop asking for shortcuts disguised as love. I learned to stop offering my strength to people who only respected it when they needed it. My mother still struggles with the fact that I did not come back and restore the family myth. Snorts, my father still speaks in that tone sometimes, though not to me anymore. They begged. Yes. 5 months later, just like the title says, they begged. But the moment that changed my life wasn't the begging, it was the walking out. Because that was the moment I finally understood that family can take your title, your office, your seat at the table, even the company built by your own hands. But they cannot take the mind that created it unless you hand that over too. And I didn't. I kept it. I sharpened it. I rebuilt with it. That is the lesson buried under every revenge story worth telling. Winning is not destroying the people who underestimated you. Winning is building a version of your life they can no longer control, no longer rename, and no longer claim as theirs. So let me ask you this before we close. If your own family stole the result of 13 years of your life, would you do what I did? Set conditions, offer limited help, and walk forward, or would you leave them to drown in the consequences they created? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know.